The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Maya rolled over and hit the snooze button, her body aching from another 14-hour shift at the Grandview restaurant. Her small apartment was quiet, except for the soft breathing coming from the bedroom next door, where her mother slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Maya dragged herself to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The face staring back at her was tired, with dark circles under brown eyes that used to sparkle with dreams. Her hands, once soft and carefully maintained for piano performances, now bore small cuts from washing dishes and serving plates. She flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar stiffness that came from hours of carrying heavy trays instead of dancing across piano keys. 3 years ago, everything was different. Maya had just graduated from one of the most famous music schools in the country. She had big dreams, recording contracts waiting, and concert halls booking her performances. But life has a way of changing plans when you least expect it. Her mother's illness came suddenly, bringing medical bills that grew faster than weeds after rain. Insurance covered some things, but not everything. Not the special treatments. Not the medications that actually helped. The choice was simple but heartbreaking. Maya could chase her dreams while her mother suffered, or she could set aside her music career and work whatever jobs paid the bills. For Maya, there was no real choice at all. Family came first. It always had. She got dressed in her black uniform and white apron, the same outfit she wore 6 days a week. The 7th day was spent at the diner downtown, where the pay was less but the tips sometimes made up for it. 2 jobs, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was the only way to keep up with the medical expenses and rent for their small apartment. The Grandview restaurant sat in the heart of the city's wealthiest district. It was the kind of place where dinner for 2 could cost more than Maya made in a week. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and oil paintings that probably cost more than her car decorated the walls. In the corner of the main dining room sat a beautiful black grand piano, perfectly tuned but rarely played except for special events. Maya tried not to look at the piano when she worked. It reminded her of everything she had given up. But sometimes late at night when she was cleaning tables after the restaurant closed, she would run her fingers along its keys without pressing them down. She could almost hear the music in her head, feel the familiar weight of her hands finding their home. The other staff members at Grandview were kind enough, but Maya kept her past to herself. She had learned early on that telling people about her music background only led to awkward questions and looks of pity. It was easier to just be Maya the waitress, not Maya the former concert pianist. Besides, in a place like Grandview, the wealthy customers already looked down on the help. Knowing she had once been one of them in a way would only make things more complicated. Her shift started at 6 a.m. with prep work. Maya arranged flowers on tables, polished silverware, and checked that everything was perfect for the day's first customers. The morning crowd was usually business people grabbing expensive coffee and pastries before important meetings. They were polite but distant, treating her like part of the furniture. But today was different. Today the entire restaurant buzzed with nervous energy. The owner, Mr. Peterson, had called an all-hands meeting the night before to announce that they would be hosting a very special event. Richard Blackwood, one of the richest men in the city, was bringing his annual charity party to Grandview. The whole place would be booked for the evening, with over 100 of the city's most important people attending. Maya had heard of Richard Blackwood, of course. Everyone had. He owned tech companies, real estate, and had his fingers in half the businesses in the city. His face was often in the newspapers, usually announcing some new deal or donation. But the staff at Grandview knew him for different reasons. He was demanding, rude, and seemed to enjoy making people uncomfortable. Other restaurants in the area had stories about him, and none of them were good. Mr. Peterson was sweating as he went over the evening's plans with the staff. Everything had to be perfect. The tables arranged just so. The wine selection approved personally by Mr. Blackwood's assistant. Even the flowers had been chosen according to specific instructions. One mistake could mean losing the biggest client the restaurant had ever had. And Maya, Mr. Peterson said, pulling her aside after the meeting, Mr. Blackwood specifically requested that you handle his table tonight. Maya's stomach dropped. Me? But why? I don't know, Mr. Peterson admitted, wringing his hands. His assistant called yesterday and asked for our best server. I told them about you, how you never make mistakes, how the customers always compliment your service. Maybe that's why. But Maya had a sinking feeling it was something else. Rich men like Richard Blackwood didn't usually pay attention to waitresses unless they had plans, and from what she had heard about him, those plans were never good for the people involved. The day passed slowly as Maya tried to focus on her regular customers while worrying about the evening ahead. She served lunch to business executives, refilled coffee cups for elderly ladies who lunched, and smiled through complaints about food that was too hot, too cold, or not exactly what was ordered. All the while, her mind kept drifting to the grand piano in the corner and the man who would soon be sitting near it. By 4 p.m., the regular dinner service was winding down as the staff prepared for the evening's event. Extra tables were brought in, the lighting was adjusted, and fresh flowers replaced the morning arrangements. The piano was cleaned and polished until it shone like black glass under the chandeliers. Maya changed into a fresh uniform and redid her hair, making sure every detail was perfect. She practiced her brightest smile in the bathroom mirror, the one she had perfected over 3 years of serving people who sometimes treated her like she was invisible. Tonight, she would need that smile more than ever. As the first guests began arriving at 6 p.m., Maya took her position near the back of the restaurant, watching and waiting. She recognized some faces from newspapers and television, politicians, business leaders, celebrities who lived in the city's most expensive neighborhoods. They air-kissed and shook hands, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings as they sipped champagne and nibbled on appetizers that cost more per bite than Maya's hourly wage. And then he walked in. Richard Blackwood was exactly what Maya had expected: tall, expensively dressed, with silver hair and the kind of confident smile that came from never being told no. His wife, an elegant woman in a stunning blue dress, followed behind him, looking uncomfortable as he immediately began holding court with the other guests. Maya watched from across the room as Mr. Peterson practically bowed while greeting them, showing them to the best table in the house, right next to the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her serving tray and walked toward what she somehow knew would be the most important table of her life. Maya's hands shook slightly as she approached Richard Blackwood's table. She had served thousands of customers over the past 3 years, but something about this man made her nervous. Maybe it was the way he looked at people, like he was sizing them up for his own entertainment. Or maybe it was the stories she had heard from other servers around the city. "Good evening," Maya said with her practiced smile, setting down water glasses with steady hands despite her nerves. "Welcome to Grandview. I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Richard barely glanced up from his conversation with a city councilman. His wife, Elena, smiled warmly at Maya and mouthed a quiet "thank you." There was something kind in her eyes, but also tired, like she had spent years apologizing for her husband's behavior. The first hour went smoothly enough. Maya brought appetizers, filled wine glasses, and answered questions about the menu. Richard was demanding, but not unusually so. He sent back his first glass of wine because it wasn't the right temperature, complained that the bread wasn't warm enough, and asked Maya to move his chair twice because he didn't like where it was positioned. Standard difficult customer behavior that Maya had learned to handle with grace. But as the evening wore on and the wine flowed freely, Richard's true personality began to show. Maya noticed how he spoke to the other staff members who came near his table. When a young server accidentally bumped his chair while passing by, Richard's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a knife. "Watch where you're going, kid. This suit costs more than you make in 6 months." The young server, barely out of high school, turned red and mumbled an apology before hurrying away. Elena touched her husband's arm and whispered something, but he brushed her off with an annoyed wave. Maya felt her jaw clench but kept her expression neutral. She had seen this before. Rich people who thought money gave them the right to humiliate others. But she needed this job, needed the money, so she bit her tongue and continued serving. The charity auction started after dinner, with various local celebrities and business leaders taking turns at the microphone to encourage bidding on expensive vacation packages and artwork. Richard bid aggressively on several items, clearly enjoying the attention as his paddle shot up again and again. Every winning bid was accompanied by a loud announcement of his name and generous applause from the crowd. Maya was clearing dessert plates when she overheard Richard talking to the man next to him about the evening's entertainment. "You know what this party needs?" Richard said, his voice getting louder as the wine took effect. "Some real entertainment, not just these boring speeches about charity, something fun." His eyes scanned the room and landed on the grand piano in the corner. A slow smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that made Maya's stomach turn. She had seen that look before, usually right before someone did something cruel. "Elena, remember that party last month where we got the bartender to sing karaoke? That was hilarious. The poor guy couldn't carry a tune to save his life, but he tried so hard." Richard laughed loudly at the memory, drawing attention from nearby tables. Elena's face went pale. "Richard, please don't." But Maya could see the wheels turning in his head. Richard was the kind of man who found joy in other people's embarrassment. He thrived on putting people in uncomfortable situations where they had to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. The auction was winding down when Richard suddenly stood up, his wineglass in hand. He tapped a knife against the crystal, making a clear ringing sound that cut through the conversations around the room. Gradually, the entire restaurant fell silent, as over 100 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard announced, his voice carrying easily across the room, "I hope you're all enjoying this wonderful evening for such a great cause." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Maya felt a chill run down her spine as she watched from her position near the kitchen doors. Whatever was coming, she knew it wouldn't be good. "Now, I know we've had some great entertainment tonight with the auction, but I think we need something special to end the evening. Something memorable." Richard's gaze swept across the room before landing on Maya. "Our lovely server here has been taking such good care of us all night. I think she deserves a chance to shine." Maya's blood ran cold. She could feel dozens of eyes turning toward her, studying her like she was some kind of exhibit in a museum. The other staff members had stopped what they were doing to watch, their faces filled with sympathy and worry. "I'm thinking," Richard continued, gesturing toward the piano with his wineglass, "that our hard-working waitress here should give us a little musical performance. What do you say, Maya? I bet you've always dreamed of playing piano for a room full of important people." The tsiu. Silence in the room was deafening. Maya felt her cheeks burning as she stood frozen near the wall, her serving tray clutched in her hands like a shield. She could see Mr. Peterson across the room, his face twisted with worry but unable to intervene without risking his biggest client. "Come on, don't be shy," Richard pressed, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "I'll even make it worth your while. $50 to play us a song. That's probably more than you make in tips all night, right?" A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maya could see that not everyone was enjoying Richard's impromptu entertainment. Elena looked mortified, staring down at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. An older gentleman at a nearby table shook his head in disgust but said nothing. But Richard was just getting started. He was clearly enjoying the attention, the power he held over the situation. This was what he lived for, moments where he could remind everyone in the room exactly where they stood in relation to him. "What's the matter?" he called out, his voice getting louder. "Don't tell me you're too good to entertain the people who pay your salary. We've all paid good money to be here tonight, and I think we deserve a little extra show for our charitable donations." Maya felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of all these people. She had endured 3 years of difficult customers, rude comments, and thankless work. But this felt different. This felt personal. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ice clinking in water glasses. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Would the waitress break down in tears? Would she refuse and storm out? Would she try to play and embarrass herself for their amusement? Richard took a step toward the piano, gesturing grandly. "Come on, Maya. Don't keep your audience waiting. Just bang out some notes for us." How hard can it be? Those words hit Maya like a physical blow. Bang out some notes. As if the piano was just a toy, as if music was just noise to fill the silence. As if the years she had spent training, practicing, perfecting her craft meant nothing at all. Maya looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. Some looked cruel and expectant, eager to see her humiliated. Others looked uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. A few looked genuinely sympathetic but helpless to change the situation. And then Maya made a decision that would change everything. Maya stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds. The entire room held its breath, waiting to see what she would do. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Part of her wanted to run to the kitchen, grab her purse, and never come back. But another part of her, a part that had been sleeping for 3 years, was slowly waking up. She thought about her mother, lying in that hospital bed last month, squeezing Maya's hand and saying, "I'm so proud of everything you've given up for me, sweetheart. But I hope someday you'll find your way back to your music." She thought about all the late nights practicing scales until her fingers bled, all the competitions she had won, all the dreams she had carefully folded up and put away. Maya set down her serving tray on the nearest table. The sound of metal hitting wood seemed to echo through the silent restaurant. She looked directly at Richard, who was smiling like a cat that had cornered a mouse. His eyes sparkled with cruel delight as he waited for her to either break down crying or stumble through some embarrassing attempt at playing. "All right," Maya said quietly, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll play for you." Richard clapped his hands together, clearly thrilled with his victory. "Wonderful. This should be entertaining." He turned to address the room again. "Ladies and gentlemen, our brave waitress has agreed to give us a little performance. Let's give her some encouragement." A few people clapped politely, but most of the room remained uncomfortably silent. Maya could see the pity in their faces as she walked toward the piano. They thought they were about to witness a humiliation. They had no idea what was actually about to happen. Maya's legs felt shaky as she crossed the room, but with each step, something inside her grew stronger. She hadn't touched a real piano in over a year. The last time was at a music store downtown, when she had snuck in during her lunch break and played for 5 minutes before a salesperson asked her to leave. Her fingers had been stiff then, out of practice. But muscle memory was a powerful thing. She reached the piano bench and paused for a moment, running her hand along the smooth black surface of the instrument. It was a beautiful piano, perfectly maintained and recently tuned. She could tell just by looking at it that it was worth more than most people's cars. Under different circumstances, she would have been thrilled to play such a magnificent instrument. Maya sat down on the bench and adjusted its height slightly. She placed her hands on her knees and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The room was so quiet she could hear people breathing, the soft clink of ice in glasses, someone shifting in their chair. "Come on," Richard called out, from his table, his voice cutting through the silence. "We don't have all night. Just play something simple. Happy Birthday or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Something even you can handle." His words stung, but they also did something unexpected. They made Maya angry. Really, truly angry in a way she hadn't been in 3 years. She was tired of being invisible. Tired of being treated like she didn't matter. Tired of hiding who she really was because it was easier than dealing with people's assumptions. Maya lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The familiar feel of ivory under her fingertips sent a shiver through her entire body. It was like coming home after a long, difficult journey. For just a moment, she forgot about the crowd, forgot about Richard's mocking smile, forgot about everything except the music that was about to flow from her soul. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room like water pouring into an empty vessel. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace, each note perfect and precise. The melody started soft and mysterious, like a secret being whispered in the dark. The effect on the room was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped, mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. Every person in the restaurant turned to stare at the waitress who had just transformed into something completely different. Richard's smug smile began to fade as he realized that what he was hearing was not the amateur fumbling he had expected. This was real music, performed by someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. His wife Elena sat up straighter, in her chair, her eyes wide with amazement. Maya was lost in the music now, her body swaying slightly as her hands danced across the keys. 3 years of serving tables and washing dishes fell away like old clothes. This was who she really was. This was what she had been born to do. The piece grew more complex and demanding, requiring lightning-fast fingerwork and perfect timing that only came from years of serious training. An elderly woman at a corner table gasped and covered her mouth with her hand. She was a retired music teacher who had spent 50 years listening to students attempt this exact piece. She knew how incredibly difficult it was, how many professional pianists struggled with its technical demands. Hearing it played with such skill and emotion by a waitress in a restaurant was like discovering a diamond in a pile of rocks. The music built to a dramatic crescendo, Maya's fingers flying across the keys in passages that would challenge even conservatory graduates. Every note was crisp and clear, every phrase shaped with the kind of musical understanding that couldn't be faked or learned from YouTube videos. This was the work of someone who had spent years studying with master teachers, someone who had dedicated their life to understanding music at its deepest level. A businessman who had been checking his phone when Maya started playing slowly put the device down, completely captivated by what he was hearing. A young couple who had been whispering to each other fell silent, holding hands as the beautiful melody washed over them. Even the restaurant staff had stopped what they were doing, standing frozen in amazement. Richard's face had gone through several changes during the performance. The mocking smile had disappeared first, replaced by confusion, then surprise, then something that looked almost like fear as he began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The woman he had intended to humiliate was revealing herself to be extraordinarily talented, making him look like a fool in front of everyone who mattered to him. Maya reached the final section of the piece, where the melody became both heartbreakingly beautiful and technically demanding. Her years of training showed in every note as she navigated the complex passages with ease, her expression peaceful and focused despite the emotional intensity of the music. This wasn't just playing. This was artistry at its highest level. As the final notes rang out, the restaurant remained completely silent for several long seconds. Maya kept her hands on the keys, her eyes still closed, savoring the feeling of being herself again after so long. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable, a held breath that the entire room was waiting to release. And then, like a dam breaking, the applause began. The applause started slowly with just one person clapping, then another joined in. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. People rose from their seats, some with tears in their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Maya opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. The faces staring back at her were completely different from the ones that had watched her walk to the piano just minutes before. Gone were the looks of pity and expectation of embarrassment. Instead, she saw amazement, respect, and something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, recognition for her true talent. The elderly woman who had gasped during the performance was now standing and clapping so hard her jewelry rattled. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she mouthed the words, "Beautiful, just beautiful," over and over again. The businessman who had been on his phone was shaking his head in wonder, as if he couldn't believe what his ears had heard. Elena, Richard's wife, had both hands pressed to her heart, her face glowing with emotion. She understood music well enough to know that what she had just heard was extraordinary. She began walking toward the piano, weaving between tables of still applauding guests. "That was incredible," Elena said when she reached Maya, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I haven't heard Chopin played like that since I was a student at the conservatory 30 years ago. Where did you study?" Maya felt overwhelmed by the attention, but there was no point in hiding anymore. "Juilliard," she said quietly, still sitting on the piano bench. "I graduated 3 years ago." A gasp went through the nearby guests who had heard her answer. Juilliard was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Getting accepted there was nearly impossible, and graduating meant you were among the most talented musicians of your generation. Juilliard? Repeated a distinguished older gentleman who had approached during the conversation. My dear, I'm Professor Williams from the City University's music department. I've heard hundreds of students attempt that piece over the years. What you just played was absolutely flawless. The technique, the emotion, the interpretation. It was masterful. More people began gathering around the piano, all wanting to speak with Maya. A woman in an elegant black dress introduced herself as the director of the city's symphony orchestra. A young man with kind eyes said he was a music journalist for the local newspaper. Another woman mentioned she was a talent scout for a major recording company. But through all of this, Maya kept glancing back at Richard's table. He was still, sitting there, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists on the white tablecloth. The man who had been so confident and cruel just minutes before now looked small and embarrassed. Several people at nearby tables were staring at him with expressions of disgust and disappointment. Richard, how could you? Maya heard one of his business partners say in a loud whisper. You tried to humiliate someone who is clearly a world-class musician. Do you have any idea how this makes you look? Richard's face flushed red. He had built his reputation on being smart, on knowing how to read people and situations. But tonight, he had made a terrible mistake in front of everyone who mattered in his social and business circles. The room was buzzing with whispered conversations about his behavior, and none of them were kind. Maya stood up from the piano bench, still feeling shaky from the performance and the overwhelming response. The music director of the symphony gently took her arm. My dear, you have extraordinary talent, she said. Why are you working as a waitress? You should be performing in concert halls, not serving tables. Maya felt her throat tighten with emotion. My mother has been very sick, she explained. I needed steady income for her medical bills. Music doesn't always pay the bills right away, and she needed help immediately. The crowd around her grew quiet, understanding now why someone with such incredible gifts had been hidden away in a restaurant uniform. Their expressions shifted from confusion to admiration and respect. Here was someone who had sacrificed her dreams for family, who had put love before personal ambition. Elena had stayed close to Maya throughout the conversations. Now she stepped forward, her voice clear and determined. What if the medical bills weren't a problem anymore? What if you could focus on your music again? Maya looked at her in confusion. I don't understand. My family's foundation supports arts education and helps talented musicians who are struggling financially, Elena continued. We've been looking for someone exactly like you, someone with incredible talent who just needs the right support to share their gifts with the world. The crowd murmured with excitement. Elena's foundation was well known in the city for its generous support of the arts. Several successful musicians had gotten their start with help from her family's money and connections. Professor Williams nodded, enthusiastically. I could help arrange auditions with several orchestras. With your skill level, I'm confident you could secure a position within months. The recording company scout pulled out her business card. We've been looking for a classical pianist for a new album project. After hearing you play tonight, I think you might be exactly what we need. Maya felt dizzy with all the sudden opportunities being offered to her. Just an hour ago, she had been invisible, just another waitress serving wealthy people who barely noticed her existence. Now, some of the most important people in the city's music scene were talking about changing her life completely. But the most surprising moment came when a teenage girl pushed through the crowd of adults. She had been at the party with her parents, probably bored out of her mind until Maya started playing. Excuse me, the girl said shyly. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been taking piano lessons for 5 years, but I was thinking about quitting, because it's so hard. Hearing you play tonight, it reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. You made something so difficult look beautiful. Maya knelt down to the girl's eye level. Don't ever give up on something you love, she said softly. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the hardest work. The girl smiled and hugged Maya before running back to her parents, who were watching with warm smiles. Meanwhile, Richard had quietly stood up from his table. He looked around the room, seeing the disapproving faces and hearing the whispered comments about his behavior. Several of his usual social circle were pointedly ignoring him, their backs turned in his direction. He walked slowly toward the piano, each step seeming to take enormous effort. The crowd parted to let him through, but their faces remained cold and unwelcoming. When he reached Maya, he stopped and stood there for a moment, struggling to find words. He began, then stopped. His voice was hoarse, and for the first time all evening, he looked genuinely human instead of like a cruel caricature of wealth and power. The entire restaurant held its breath, waiting to see what the man who had started this entire evening would say to the woman who had turned his cruel joke into something magical. Richard stood in front of Maya, his face pale and his usual confidence completely gone. The entire restaurant watched in silence as the man who had tried to humiliate her struggled to find his voice. For the first time in years, Richard Blackwood looked genuinely ashamed of himself. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I did tonight was wrong. I thought I was going to embarrass you, but instead, you've shown everyone in this room what real talent looks like, and you've shown me what kind of person I've become." Maya studied his face, looking for any sign that this was just another performance, another way to manipulate the situation to his advantage. But what she saw was genuine regret. His hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes couldn't quite meet hers. "I've spent so many years thinking that having money made me better than other people," Richard continued. "I forgot that everyone has their own story, their own struggles, their own talents. I forgot how to treat people with basic respect." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "You could have refused to play tonight. You could have walked away and made me look like a fool. But instead you gave everyone here a gift. You shared something beautiful with us, even though I didn't deserve it." The crowd around them was completely silent, watching this unexpected moment of vulnerability from a man known for his arrogance and cruelty. Elena stood beside her husband, tears in her eyes. As she watched him finally confront his own behavior, Maya felt a mix of emotions as she listened to Richard's words. Part of her was still angry about how he had treated her, how he had tried to use her for his own entertainment. But another part of her recognized the courage it took for someone like him to admit he was wrong in front of all these people. "Thank you for the apology," Maya said quietly. "But you should know that what you did tonight wasn't just about me. You've probably treated dozens of people the same way over the years. The difference is that tonight, you got caught." Richard nodded, his face flushing with shame. "You're right. And I want to do something to make up for that. Not just to you, but to everyone I've hurt with my behavior." Elena stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Maya's arm. "Our foundation would like to offer you a full scholarship," she said. "Not just for music lessons or equipment, but everything. Your mother's medical bills, your living expenses, whatever you need so you can focus completely on your music career." Maya felt her knees go weak. The amount of money Elena was talking about would change everything. Her mother could get the best medical care available. Maya could return to performing without worrying about paying rent or buying groceries. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. "But there's one condition," Elena continued. "We want you to help us start a new program. We're going to create scholarships for other talented people who are working regular jobs because they can't afford to pursue their dreams. You would help us find them and give them the same chance we're giving you." Professor Williams nodded, enthusiastically. "I know at least a dozen former students who are driving buses or working in offices because they couldn't afford to continue their music education. With your help, we could change their lives too." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. Just a few hours ago she had been invisible, just another waitress serving rich people who barely noticed her existence. Now she wasn't just getting her own dreams back, she was being asked to help make other people's dreams come true too. "I would love that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "More than anything." The crowd erupted in applause again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for her musical performance, it was celebration for a story that was touching everyone's hearts. Here was proof that talent and kindness could triumph over cruelty and prejudice. The teenage girl who had spoken to Maya earlier pushed through the crowd again, this time with her parents behind her. Her father stepped forward with a warm smile. "My daughter hasn't stopped talking about your performance," he said. "Would you consider giving her piano lessons? We've been looking for a teacher who could really inspire her." Before Maya could answer, several other parents stepped forward with similar requests. Word was already spreading through the room about Maya's background and the new scholarship program Elena had announced. People were pulling out their phones, not to ignore the conversation around them, but to call friends and family members who might benefit from this unexpected opportunity. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant owner, had been watching everything from across the room with tears in his eyes. He approached Maya with a huge smile on his face. "Maya, I want you to know that you'll always have a job here if you want it," he said. "But I'm hoping that won't be necessary. What you did tonight was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in 30 years of running this restaurant." Maya looked around the room at all the faces surrounding her. Just hours ago, most of these people had been strangers who saw her as nothing more than hired help. Now they were offering her opportunities, asking for her help with their children, treating her like the accomplished musician she had always been inside. But the most important moment came when Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw it was from her mother, who was staying with Maya's aunt for the evening. "Sweetheart, Mrs. Chen from next door just called. She said the evening news is talking about something amazing that happened at your restaurant tonight. She said they're calling you a hidden musical genius. What's going on? Are you all right?" Maya laughed through her tears as she realized that word of tonight's events was already spreading beyond the restaurant. The music journalist, who had introduced himself earlier, was probably already writing his story. The recording company Scout was making phone calls. And somewhere in the city, other talented people working thankless jobs might soon get the chance to share their gifts with the world. 6 months later, Maya stood on the stage of the city's most prestigious concert hall, wearing an elegant black dress and looking out at a sold-out audience. Her mother sat in the front row, healthy and glowing thanks to the medical treatment that Elena's foundation had provided. Next to her sat the teenage girl who had inspired Maya that night at the restaurant, along with a dozen other young musicians who were now part of the scholarship program. In the back of the concert hall, Richard Blackwood sat quietly with his wife. He had kept his promise to change his behavior, becoming one of the foundation's most dedicated volunteers and using his business connections to help other hidden talents find opportunities. He never asked for recognition or praise for his work. It was simply his way of making up for the years he had spent treating people poorly. As Maya placed her hands on the piano keys and began to play, she thought about that night, 6 months ago, when her life had changed forever. She had learned that sometimes the worst moments can become the best opportunities, and that courage to be yourself can inspire others to be brave too. The music filled the concert hall, and Maya smiled as she played, knowing that somewhere in the audience might be another hidden talent waiting for their moment to shine.